Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. We thank GoFan and VNN, the exclusive sponsors of the UIAAA Connection. Now operating as one combined company, GoFan and VNN offer a seamless experience through digital ticketing and athletic websites. They make it easy to direct fans to one central place for schedules, communication, and tickets for both home and away events. We appreciate GoFan and VNN for their continued support and exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunter. Today we have as our special guest, Todd Olson, Certified Master Athletic Administrator, the Director of Student Activities for the Fargo School District. Welcome to the podcast, Todd.
Thanks, Hutch. Thanks for having me.
Let's have you begin by sharing with our audience here in the U.S. and around the world where you grew up, where you went to school, your first job, etc.
All right. I grew up in a town named Cavalier, North Dakota. Best way of thinking of it is it's 20 miles south of Canada and 20 miles west of Minnesota. So tucked up in the northeast corner of the state. My dad was the superintendent of schools there. My mother was a teacher. It was a small K-12 building, so you saw mom and dad every day. And, there were some expectations along with that of how you behaved at school, and it was good. Growing up, our life revolved around the school. We went to every activity that was ever in the school throughout my time in school, so very school-centered on a lot of the things we did. From there, I went to college at the University of North Dakota initially for 1 year on a basketball scholarship. After my first year, I transferred to Mayville State University, which is a small NIAAA down the road 40 miles from the University of North Dakota, about halfway between Grand Forks and Fargo. And I continued to play basketball there, got a degree in mathematics education. And my first job was teaching at Grand Forks Central High School. I taught math and coached basketball there for 14 years out of the gate, and then later moved on to administration. I've been married to my wife, Beth, will be 35 years in July, and we have 2 children that are married. David, our son, lives in Tampa and is married to Callie. And then Caitlin lives about 3 miles from us and is married to Brady. And she has our granddaughter, Olivia. So we became grandparents in the last couple of years, and that's been pretty exciting.
That's awesome. I want to ask you about your years of coaching while you were teaching math. The reason I ask is because I spent 34 years as a math teacher also, and a coach, and then of course AD after that. But talk about the challenges, because math sometimes is not the favorite topic of a lot of our students.
Very true. I enjoyed my time teaching. I taught usually 3 hours a day of the quote unquote the tough kids. So kind of introduction to algebra type kids who they did not just usually not like math, they didn't like school. So it was a real relationship building time. I enjoyed those kids. I usually had 2 or 3 hours of, an algebra 2 or a geometry to kind of give me a little different subject matter. And I had to deal with the department chair that I was done teaching every day at 2:00 so I could get ready for basketball practice. And that seemed to work out. If I would teach certain classes, I got certain favors in terms of how my schedule worked with coaching. So it was a great time. I thoroughly enjoyed coaching and teaching, and I have missed it from time to time over the years when things get not so pleasant sometimes as they do in these positions.
Yeah, that's well said. Let me ask you this. So you grew up in Cavalier, North Dakota. I'm glad you told me where it was, because otherwise I have to look it up on a map, but probably much like small towns here in Utah. So what type of youth sports choices did you have in a town that small? Did you have to Was there enough to do, or did you have to play surrounding towns and Little League, that type of thing?
Yeah, we played a county-wide schedule in Little League. We played a county-wide type schedule in basketball, and then there wasn't youth football at the time, so you didn't start football till we were in seventh grade, but there was always plenty to do. We only had summer baseball. We didn't have high school baseball, so most of us were four sport athletes where we played football, basketball, or
Hmm.
wrestled, and then ran track in the spring and played baseball in the summer. They started baseball a few years after I got out of high school, but my dad would not start a baseball program because he convinced his school board to build a new track. And he knew that the track wouldn't get used if he started baseball. So we just played in the summer and we're pretty good, but didn't play high school
Okay.
baseball.
All right. Well, so let me ask, so if my geography is correct on North Dakota, so Cavalier's got to be pretty much north of Grand Forks. Is that correct? And
Yep.
how many miles is that? If it's
It,
20 miles from the border, was 100 mile, 50?
it's about 60 miles north and 20 miles to the west of Grand Forks.
Okay. Okay, so let's have you talk for a minute about the mentors you've had in your life, growing up, the mentors you had in college, when you started teaching and coaching, and mentors in your life as an AD.
Sure, my dad would be my number one mentor. He was a school administrator for many years, and prior to that was a teacher and a coach. And, so a lot of the things I picked up in life, I attribute directly to him. He was well ahead of his time in terms of the mental side of performance. And I, as a young kid, had a lot of resources thrown my way that were things that he had picked up along the way. So it was a good start. In high school, I had wonderful coaches. I played basketball for a gentleman named Jim Bawley, who later became a good friend of mine. I played football for a legendary coach in our state named Rod Oxendahl, who, I often introduced him at coaches' clinics as the best coach I ever had in any sport at any level. He was just superior in his work ethic and how he prepared and how he organized his program. So I took a lot from that. My two college coaches, Dave Gunther and Dave Knowles, learned an awful lot from those two gentlemen. And I had a professor at Mayville State named Dr. Merwin Lang, who had a very profound influence on me as a teacher and just how you conduct yourself. He was the ultimate professional. Once I get in the working world, I've worked almost half of my career for Dr. Jeff Schatz, who's been a mentor of mine. And then, you know, I'm probably one of the few people that's followed two NIAAA Hall of Fame ADs into their AD positions. And I followed Craig Perry at Grand Forks, and then I followed Ed Lockwood in Fargo. So talk about a couple of great examples of how you conduct yourself and how you conduct your business.
That's awesome. Let me ask you a little bit of a personal question here. Todd, what's your biggest failure or disappointment in life, and what did you learn from it?
Something I come back to often is about halfway through my 14 years of coaching, I had a very talented group of kids who I tried everything with. We should have probably been a top two or three team in the state, and we were a 500 ball club. And as I look back on it, I had a lot of early success as a coach and had a lot of kids who were coach's kid type of kids. And, my first 4 years in coaching, we went to the state tournament. My third year, we were state champions. And then I got into a little bit of a mid-career lull, and I had this group of kids come together, and I could not get them to play together. No matter how hard I tried, we never got there. And it was probably as talented a group as I ever coached. And it was funny, one of their mothers was our commons supervisor at Central High School, and about 2/3 of the way through the season, I'm kind of frustrated, and she looks at me and says, "Well, they hate each other, don't you?" And that just hit me like a brick wall that I hadn't even entertained that possibility as a coach that everybody who was on a team didn't like each other. And I started looking then at how do you prevent this from happening again? And I come back to that and tell that story often to coaches that, you have to do those extra things to get kids, especially now, to play together and be good teammates. And you have to teach some of those things, specifically rather than just understanding that, hey, you're on a team, so you're all bought in and you're going to do what's best for the team. And, that group, and I still feel bad that we weren't better. A lot of them have become very successful people in life, but I just couldn't figure that crew out. And that was something that I reflect on often.
That is well said, and thank you for sharing that because I think that is so true for no matter what sport you're talking about and no matter what coach or AD you're talking to, because I think that's an important thing. So thank you for opening up and sharing that. Let's talk for a minute about the job of athletic administration. Talk about how it's changed or how much it's still the same since you first became an AD.
Well, I think as I reflect on what's changed, the technology side has certainly changed. I used to laugh at the 4-inch binder and the corded phone and, all the things we hauled around for scheduling meetings. We just had our scheduling meeting and, 99% of it was done before anybody walked in the room. And it used to be just a day-long adventure of grinding it out for doing your winter schedules. And so I think the technology thing has changed on the positive side. I think on the negative side, when I started in this business 35 years ago, parents didn't view their kids' participation in sports as an investment to the level that I believe they do now. And that's not every parent, of course, but there's a segment now that they've spent money and youth programming and special training and all these things, and they expect that someday that's going to pay off, whether it's a college scholarship, whatever they're looking for. But I think that's one thing that's changed. I think social media has changed a lot of things. Some of it's not bad, some of it's really not good. But that's obviously different. I always tell people I'm thankful that wasn't around when I was growing up because might not have been as well thought of in some areas because we all did some stuff that was probably questionable.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
so well said. I want to talk about your journey now with the NDIAAA, the NIAAA. You've obviously mentioned Ed and Craig earlier, and I would throw into that bunch at least the people I know from North Dakota, Daryl and Laurel, your current state executive director. But so talk about how a basketball coach now gets the job as an AD, you become an AD. How do you become involved with your state association, and then how does that grow into your involvement nationally?
Well, I think it was, having Craig as a good friend and a role model, it was just a natural expectation when I took the position in Grand Forks that I was going to be very involved in the NDIAAA. I mean, that wasn't even a question. I think in my 22 years in athletic administration, I've been at the board table for the NDIAAA 20 of those years. In some capacity, I was the president a couple different times, 10 years apart, because of people leaving the business when they're on the president's track. I've been the NDIAAA spring conference director for the last 14 years. And, prior to that, I was the president of the State Coaches Association. So I had some statewide involvement that just kind of evolved into the AD group and has really continued ever since. I frequently tell people that my professional organizations and associations have been the most rewarding part of my 35 years in education, without question. And I'm a very strong advocate for getting new ADs involved and, setting them down and explaining to them that this is your support group right here. These are your people. Get to know them, work hard with them, and a lot of good things will happen. as far as getting involved in the NIAAA, my first involvement, other than going to the conference, which I was fortunate in my entire athletic administration career to be in districts that supported going every year. I started out on the coaches education committee when it was kind of probably a little more NFHS led than NIAAA led. Initially, I was an early adopter of the fundamentals of coaching. Tim Flannery came up to our state when that course first came out and taught a bunch of us that. And I traveled around the state teaching that course to others. And, now that's part of our certification. So that was my initial involvement. And then one day I'm sitting in my office in July and Ed and Sherry happened to be in Indianapolis, which I didn't know, but phone rings and it's Ed and he says, "Hey, we want you to be on a certification committee." And from there, things just kind of took off. I was on the certification committee, and then that evolved into North Dakota's turn came up in Section 5 to have a board position. And I was fortunate to be selected by my peers in my state to, take that North Dakota spot. And that got us to the board, and just a lot of great relationships in Section 5. And, we jokingly call it our Section 5 mafia. But if you look at the last 15 years of presidencies of the NIAAA Board of Directors, Section 5 is pretty well represented from Army now all the way through Throny. So it's been a big source of pride in Section 5 that we're able to jump into those positions and assume leadership roles.
Let me ask you a couple of follow-ups. The first being the Section 5 mafia, because depending on which state I'm talking to or representative from each state, I think each of the states in Section 5 believes that they are what's the proper word? The indirect head of the mafia. And so from your point of view, how did I'm interested in how the Section 5 mafia nickname or whatever, how that came to be. What's your memory or recollection of that?
Well, I think it was probably an evening conversation in a lounge somewhere that either Mike McGurk or Josh Scott or myself came up with. We were all serving at the same time on the board, along with Jamie Sherwood for the year I was a president. You got 4 Section 5 people around the board table. That's pretty rare. It was kind of the perfect storm in terms of how you could maximize your section's membership on the board. And we had the secretary, we had the president in an extra year term. We had McGurk just coming on. Jamie was just finishing. So I don't think you can have more than 4.
Yeah, well, I think that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Let me ask you a little bit about the certification committee. If I remember right, I think from your time on that committee, you have got maybe people like Tall, past president now, Pete Shambo, Appalachian Trail Pete from New York, Dr. Jake down from Florida. I mean, that's a pretty high-powered group. So maybe talk for a minute about the special time on the certification committee.
Oh, it was a wonderful group of people, very insightful people. You talk about Dr. Jake. He and I were kind of good partners on the certification committee. We spent a lot of extra time together and enjoyed hanging out. And Pete Shambo, we had just a wonderful group with Ed and Sherry were leading the committee at that time. And Tall came on towards I think I was just finishing, or maybe he replaced me even, or I don't remember how that exactly timed out. But again, somebody I've known for years and years, and there was a lot of good thought around the table, and we spent a lot of time approving, whether it's CAA forms or CMAA projects. And you also got to know a lot of people across the country that way as you're communicating back and forth with them on how their project is or what their project could use to maybe be a little bit better. So that was another layer that, you just keep growing your connections, and it's an awesome organization for that.
That's awesome. I reflect back to my time before I knew you as the chair of the awards committee back in the early 2000s for 5 years and a member for another 3, which today obviously doesn't happen because they have 6-year limits on that. But uh, it's it's not rare. But if you get a chance to serve on a committee, I think people need to take that. What's rare is the chance to serve on the board, and what's even more rare is the chance to serve as the NIAAA president. So I want to give you a minute to talk about your unique opportunity you had to serve as the president of the NIAAA.
Yeah, and I always tell people it was the honor and responsibility of a lifetime. You know, I ran initially for the president the first time I was eligible and lost out at the board table to Jeff Sitz, which was probably a
Mhm.
wonderful blessing. I got to learn from him and, you know, a lot of good people on the board. And then the second time I ran, I ended up winning the election. And the other person in the finals was Scott Nordy, who is probably the best friend that I had on the board at that time. Matter of fact, Scott and I were just in Springfield, Missouri for Josh Scott's basketball tournament, where he had 5 of the
Mm,
top 8 teams in the nation at the Bass Pro Shops Tournament of Champions. So 3 of us had a good time during that. Josh worked a lot harder than Scott or I did, but you know, a lot of great relationships on that board. And it's an interesting group to lead because everybody in there is the best of the best people. So you kind of have to balance yourself between getting through the agenda and shutting your mouth and listening to all the smart people
mm.
around the table. And it's a really unique group to lead through a board meeting compared to the other boards I've led in my life. But, you know, you always had to be a little bit cognizant of, I like to get on the agenda and go. That's my nature.
Right.
And you had to slow down and pull back once in a while. You know, and then it culminates with the conference, which I think I had 16 speaking engagements at the national conference to finish up my presidency. By the end of
Right.
those 5, 6 days, it was as exhausted as I've been in a long time. It was really something.
Yeah, I'm sure. So let me ask you this. I'm sure, I mean, it's as a former board member, those times in the meetings and the ideas and the give and take are so incredible. But I want you to share if any stories come to mind of the, I don't want to say the downtime because I think so much of the board work happens when you're not around the table, when you're at dinner, when you're winding down in the lounge at the hotel at the end of the day. And so maybe just share humorous or otherwise, just some stories that you remember from the board, because I think it's important for the people out there to hear these type of things.
Oh, we called the Sheridan Lounge the meeting before the meeting. And you're right,
Yeah.
a lot of things got kicked around, discussed, you know, obviously not officially decided, but you had a pretty good idea of where people were at on different things that were going to come up on the agenda and why they were at that point. But, you know, we would have probably 3/4 of the board socially every night would stay out for a while after we got back from dinner and just discuss what was going to happen for the next day. You know, we had some interesting things. One of our biggest decisions, I guess you could call it, and our longest discussions was when we added that 4th at-large position on the board, how were we going to pair up sections? And we went on and on for hours on that at the board table, plus more hours in the meeting before the meeting. And, you know, I think we eventually ended up at a good spot. Not everyone was happy, but most thought we did pretty well, I think. But that was a lot of fun. And then another significant thing from my time on the board was organizing the 5th strategic plan, as they've just now gotten to the 6th strategic plan. I think that was one of the best things we did. We kind of created a recipe for how we're going to get representation for future strategic plans. And I know I asked Phil if they still used it 4 or 5 years later. He said, "Oh yes, we did." So just
Yeah.
how you get equal representation from around the country when you're putting together a group.
That's incredible. I want to just throw in a comment regarding the reorganization of sections, only because I was the operations chair of the what was it, the fourth strategic plan, and that's where that idea, with input from a bunch of people in and off the committee, came from. And I remember
Sure.
in that committee, after we decided we wanted this to be a point, and then the discussion went to, well, then what about this section and how are we going to, and then I just remember stopping to the group and I said, well, the board will take care of that. We just want to put out there that we want four regions instead of three. And so it's interesting that you bring that up, because I can imagine that discussion was long and hard and continuous. And like I say, I think with our membership over 16, 17,000, I think there's probably at least half of our membership that doesn't know anything different, and that it's just always been that way and everything seems fine. So thank you for bringing that up. I want you to share your observations, Todd, about the recent conference in Tampa, and what it was like attending there, and just what you saw and what you felt with, if I'm not mistaken, I think they said it was the largest. Was it bigger than Nashville, or at least second to Nashville? I can't remember exactly which one.
I think it was second to Nashville's, I think what I had heard, but I thought the Tampa site was awesome. I I've told anybody who's asked that it's in my top two now, with San Antonio and Tampa are two of my
Hmm.
favorite places to go. Now you got to understand it's in December and I live in North Dakota, so there's a little
Right.
bias towards warm weather, but I thought it was just a wonderful place to have the conference. You know, it was supposed to be there in 2020. I was the past president that year. Lannis was the
Right.
president. I felt so bad for him that he didn't get the opportunity as the president to host that conference in his home community, because I think that would have been awesome. But he was around for this one, even though he's now taken another job, interestingly enough, as the executive director of the Tampa Sports Commission. One of his jobs is to attract
It's
events back to Tampa.
right.
So the NADC is firmly in his sights, as we visited in December, that he would love to have it come back there. And I thought the facilities were wonderful, the proximity to the hotel. You know, I don't
I
hear
thought it was
as much
awesome.
now. Yeah, I don't hear as much now because I'm not on the board, but I didn't hear anybody talk about getting walked or bussed off to a hotel a distance away, because there are lots of hotels right there,
Right.
which I think is great. And I hope I'm around to see it back in Tampa again.
That's awesome. What's your favorite part of your job, Todd?
I'm an activities director instead of just an athletics director. So athletics are a huge part of my portfolio, but I really enjoy the variety of things that we offer for our kids, and just seeing how we have groups come through caroling at the district office in December, and just seeing how much and how important those other activities are to kids that may not be athletic minded. So that's a lot of fun. I host somewhere between 5 and 9 state tournaments every year. And that's an awesome part of my job, is, having coached in state tournaments and had a state championship team. I just think those kids are going to remember this night forever. And that I enjoy that part of it. Gets awful busy. And I was trying to think, I think the state track meet is the only state championship that North Dakota offers that I have not hosted. And that's always in
Wow.
Bismarck, because they have a wonderful track and field facility and it should be there. But I think every other sport we have hosted at least one time during my time in athletic administration. This winter I have a state wrestling tournament, a state hockey tournament, and a state basketball tournament with our 16-team regional tournament tucked in between there. So starting this week, it's kind of go time here at the district office of the Fargo Public Schools in terms of tournament preparation.
Yeah, I would say, let me ask you a question I should have asked you earlier when we were on the topic, but how long have you been the director of student activities? If my memory serves me, so did you, when Craig left to go to Minnesota, is that how long you've been in that office, or was someone else there before you, between the two of you?
No, I followed Craig directly, and I was the AD in Grand Forks for 7 years. And then Ed announced his retirement, and at the same time Ed was retiring, Dr. Jeff Schatz, who I had worked with most of my career, was named the superintendent in Fargo. So I think after he was approved at the school board meeting, the phone rang and he said, "Are you coming?" I said, "Yep,
Oh,
I will."
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, I was fortunate to work with him and fortunate to follow Ed.
That's great. Well, let's finish with a couple of questions. The first one being this. Todd, you've got two suggestions for a brand new athletic administrator. In order for them to become successful, they need to follow Todd's suggestions. What would your two suggestions be?
My first suggestion, I think, would be find a way to keep yourself organized. And that's a little bit different for everybody. And there are a lot of ideas out there. And I don't think there's a right way or a wrong way, but you have to find something. I have a 4-column spreadsheet that has been on my desk every day for the last 22 years. It gets updated at the end of the day with what's on tap for tomorrow. And I don't do sticky notes and all these things. It goes on the
Mhm.
spreadsheet. It gets printed out and set there. And I take great pleasure in taking out a Sharpie and crossing things off the list as they get accomplished. It's just kind of a motivating thing for me. And I would say the second thing is reach out to your fellow ADs. Join the professional organizations, find a mentor, find a group of, trusted individuals that you can go to for advice, for questions, for help. I think that is so important. Just before I jumped on here with you, Hutch, I was on the cell phone with the AD in Bismarck, 200 miles
Mm,
away, similar school district to ours. And we were talking about things that have come up in the last few days. He was wondering about
sure.
if we have youth groups come in or we have a special recognition nights, how we handle ticketing and all those things. And, you know, tomorrow I'll call him with a question about something like that because, I don't think you can place too much value on the quality of relationships you form in this business. It's so valuable that it's what'll make this an enjoyable profession or a very, very difficult profession is how well you insulate yourself with your peers and friends in the business.
I love that comment and just a follow-up comment. And I've said this numerous times on my past podcasts. The AD family, the North Dakota family, the NIAAA family, is so different from what you get in coaching. Coaches will share about 5% of their secrets because you're competing each other and you've got to get beat. You're Kurt Signetti against Cristobal, in that national
Yep.
championship game, and you're not going to share those secrets. But when you're an AD, my goodness, well, yeah, here's my handbook. Here's how we do it. Take what you want. You just said it perfectly. You were on the phone to someone else, and then the week before, someone called you. I mean, that's exactly how that works. And so there's that network is so valuable. So thank you so much for pointing that out. We'll finish with this question. Todd, what question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
You know, I I don't really think there are any, Hutch. I've appreciated the little trip down memory lane a little bit. It's
Yeah.
it's fun. It's when you've been in this business a long time, there are pretty significant things you don't always think about. And this kind of jarred a few of those that were pretty neat.
Oh, that's awesome. On that note, that wraps up this edition of the UIAAA Connection. Our special guest today has been Todd Olson, Certified Master Athletic Administrator, Director of Activities at Fargo Public Schools. Todd, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Hutch. I enjoyed it.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.